This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
At least 83 people killed after an attack by militiamen in West Darfur. Schools across the continent reopen after months of closure. And Brazil approves emergency use of 2 COVID-19 vaccines. Welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also ahead on the program. In business news, South Africa's wine industry risks a $100 million loss due to lack of storage. And in sports, we talk to African 100 meters champion Akani Simbine, who is eyeing gold at the Tokyo Games this summer. We start off in the Sudan, where 83 people are reported dead. The deaths are as a result of ethnic clashes that lasted for 2 days in the western region of Darfur. The Sudanese news agency reports hundreds more have been injured in the conflict in Darfur's capital of El Geneina. The agency says the conflict started when a man of a Masalit tribe stabbed an Arab man. Unknown militiamen are said to have taken advantage and attacked people at Krending IDP camp. This has been recorded as the worst violence since a peace deal was signed in October. The United Nations peacekeeping mission, UNAMID, withdrew from Darfur early January 2021. And now the government is reinforcing security in Darfur to protect civilians. Darfur has experienced militia wars at different times since 2003. Well, let's cross over to Juba and to Patrick Oyet for an update on the situation. Patrick, what is the latest on the clashes in Darfur?
Yes, Beatrice, the latest is that we've spoken to a government official who said they have now actually deployed heavy military and police in the region where there has been fighting. However, he also says that the fighting has not totally come to an end. Of course, in El Geneina itself, it has now subsided, but in the outskirts, there are still clashes between communities because this issue started as an issue between one community and another community, but it eventually engulfed up to 4 communities and also some militias, as you rightly said. So the situation became bad. According to the government official, 50,000 people have been displaced again, but the government says that it is doing all it can to ensure that, of course, the situation returns to normalcy, and they blame the situation on the proliferation of small arms and light weapons in the hands of so many civilians. They say that is the cause of the whole situation. But they say they have deployed the army there, and they hope that within the shortest possible time, the situation will return to normalcy.
So what impact is the withdrawal of international peacekeepers going to have on security in Darfur? Because UN peacekeepers began withdrawing from Darfur in western Sudan, El Geneina.
Yeah, Beatrice. You know, there have been clashes anyway in the Darfur ever since, as the government says it is because of the problem of proliferation of small arms and light weapons. So these conflicts have always been there. But the UN's presence in the area has been helping because the UN has been engaging with the community leaders in dialogue, and we've seen in the past at least the level of the violence reduce. But the biggest challenge now is this is a new government, less than 2 years in office, and now the UN is leaving. There's a vacuum which is going to be created, and there are so many other areas that this new government is trying to, you know, to resolve. So many issues to resolve. They have issues of the peace deal, which is still ongoing, and then they have conflicts also in other parts of the country, in the Blue Nile, in the Nuba Mountain. They're trying to resolve. So it is really a lot for them. There's a vacuum, of course, definitely created by the leaving of the UN, and to bring this conflict to a total end is going to be something that will take time, because it needs, for example, removal of weapons from the hands of unauthorized persons, civic education, and so forth. So yeah, it is the leaving of the UN is going to be something that the government have to work hard to fill that vacuum, Beatrice.
Patrick Oyet joining us there from Juba. Thank you. Meanwhile, though, the residents of Darfur are now protesting the UN's decision to withdraw peacekeeping troops from the region. Internally displaced people living in camps there have lamented that this is the wrong time for the UN peacekeepers to pull out of the conflict-hit area. Here's CGTN's Wanja Mungai with that story.
Residents of Darfur in Western Sudan are a worried lot. They are protesting against the withdrawal of the United Nations peacekeeping mission from their region.
We are on the 7th day of our sit-in, which we have organized to protest the withdrawal of the UNAMID forces. And despite this sit-in, the Security Council did not respond to our calls. The decision is final, but I hope they can take back this wrong decision and be ready for any attack that may happen at this point, so that they can protect us and not leave us to die like before.
Ahlam has been a resident of Kalma camp for 17 years. She has lived here since 2003, when clashes between the government and rebels turned their village into a war zone. The conflicts were triggered by ethnic differences between non-Arab tribes and Sudanese Arabs. At this camp, she found refuge and is among the 200,000 people that live here. It has been relatively peaceful since 2007, when the United Nations deployed 7,000 peacekeepers to patrol the area. But those patrols have ceased since the beginning of the year, after the United Nations Security Council voted to end its mandate. Residents now feel their lives are in danger, especially after Saturday's clashes in which 83 people were killed.
This means that we will go back to point zero. There will be fighting, no security, weapons will be available to people and our lands will be occupied. This is why UNAMID needs to stay here until peace is achieved. That is why I believe that the UN made a wrong decision. But I hope they correct this mistake, and the minute the UNAMID troops withdraw, they'll have an alternate solution to protect the displaced.
These recent atrocities are said to be the worst since a peace treaty was signed in October. The deal was between the transitional government and the rebels. The interim regime says it is stepping up the protection of civilians. Wanja Mungai, CGTN.
Well, let's cross over to Geneva for a live meeting there. We understand the World Health Organization is currently holding a meeting. Let's listen in.
Has sustainable and predictable funding it needs. This week, you will consider a proposal to establish an inclusive working group to define the principles for what should be funded, develop options for how much funding is needed, and consider how those priorities should be funded. If agreed by member states, the working group could consider a proposal that will come back to this board before going forward to the World Health Assembly in 2022. We're committed to accountability and to giving you value for money. And it's the right thing to do. But we ask our member states to ensure the Secretariat receives adequate money for value. Even as we work relentlessly towards ending the pandemic and responding to other emergencies, we will continue to transform to deliver an impact where it matters most in countries. Your agenda this week reflects the immense scope of WHO's work, including patient safety, non-communicable diseases, oral health, eye care, antimicrobial resistance, orphan diseases, substandard and falsified medical products, mental health, polio, immunization, and much, much more. I know that some member states have concerns about the late publication of documents for this meeting. I personally apologize for any difficulty this has caused in your preparations. We remain committed to timely delivery of governing bodies' documents, and we have made very good progress in this area. We seek your understanding given the exceptional circumstances under which our staff have been working and the very tight turnaround between the resumed World Health Assembly in November and this session of the Executive Board. We look forward to a constructive discussion this week as we work together to address the myriad other health challenges the world's people face every single day. By the end of this year, we expect to deliver up to 90% of the work we committed to at the beginning of the biennium. To respond to the disruption to essential health services in many member states, WHO is implementing a boost initiative to assign staff virtually from headquarters to work with regional and country offices in line with country needs. Full alignment of the 3 levels of WHO. In the first phase, staff have been assigned to 20 countries for system and community strengthening, financing, diagnostics, therapeutics, surveillance, and more. We will continue to support countries to progress toward this universal health coverage through intensified technical assistance for primary health care and to maintain essential health services, including for immunization and sexual, reproductive, maternal, newborn, child, and adolescent health. We will support.
The World Health Organization's Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus is speaking there on the World Health Organization's attempt at ending the COVID-19 pandemic. He says the world body remains committed to global health and that the World Health Organization will not lose focus of other global diseases as it continues to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. He has outlined efforts to respond to disruption of health services of many countries as a result of the pandemic. The WHO Director General there speaking in Geneva. Well, let's look at other stories we're following for you today. And schools in Ghana are set to reopen after 10 months of closure due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The reopening comes after President Nana Akufo-Addo warned that increasing infections were threatening to overwhelm the country's health system. Most institutions in Ghana face the challenge of enforcing the strict health protocol imposed by the government. Meanwhile, in neighboring Nigeria, Parliament is urging the government to postpone the reopening of schools by 3 months due to the increasing number of deaths attributed to the pandemic. The Parliamentary Committee on Education says that many states and individuals are not observing safety measures placed to guard against the spread of the virus. Elsewhere in Malawi, schools are due to start closing for at least 15 days. This comes after President Lazarus Chakwera announced new restrictions to combat a surge in COVID-19 cases. And in Rwanda, the government has ordered the closure of schools in Kigali. The move will be reviewed in 2 weeks' time. Schools outside Kigali are excluded from the closure. And we are now joined by CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai. He's in Accra, and Deji Badmus is in Lagos for us for more on this story. Nabil, President Akufo-Addo has pleaded with students and pupils returning to school to comply strictly with the COVID-19 protocols to avoid a shutdown of schools for a second time. Exactly what measures has the government and the schools put in place to make sure returning students comply with COVID-19 protocols?
Well, prior to the reopening of schools, the government went around disinfecting and fumigating schools in readiness for a day like this. Now, what the government says is doing now that schools have resumed is distributing at least 2 washable face masks to each student, which they can use when they are in school. The government also says it is distributing sanitizers and sanitary items to all schools, which students and teachers can use to frequently wash their hands. Now, aside these measures, the government is also linking the schools to health workers and hospitals, where should the teachers or the health authority, the school authorities detect any case or symptoms of the COVID-19, they can refer these students to the health workers or the health facilities for further action. Now, class numbers have also been reduced. For instance, if a class has 60 students, the president has charged the school authorities to reduce the number to 30 so that the students can take returns to have their lessons. And they've also reduced the number of hours that students can remain in the class for teaching and learning to 4 hours as compared to the previous time when students can be in the school for up to 7 hours. This time around, they will be in the school for only 4 hours, just to reduce the contact hours that students will be on campus. Beatrice.
Well, Deji, over in Nigeria, though, legislators are asking the federal government to postpone the planned reopening of schools by at least 3 months, citing rising cases of COVID-19. What is the response to this? What more do you know?
Well, Beatrice, that actually came from the Committee on Basic Education of the House of Representatives. And essentially what they're saying is that, look, there is no adequate preparations on ground yet for schools to reopen, that, you know, there's been some laxity in terms of the awareness campaign now, and that essentially it just wouldn't make sense to reopen schools at a time when not just that the number of infection, that's the infection rate now is going on, but that the death rate as well is quite high, and that the country is currently battling a second wave where it appears, as we're seeing, that transmission is actually very fast. So essentially that's what the lawmakers are saying, and of course quite a number of people are in support of their position. But, you know, ultimately, the final decision would eventually rest on the state governments, because the state governments are actually in charge of schools. Even though the federal government has asked that schools reopen today, fact is that the state governments have the final say. And that's the reason why some states have actually chosen not to reopen schools, while some have opened. For instance, in Lagos, where I am, schools have been asked to reopen. But there are quite a number of other states where schools are still shut until, according to the state governments now, every protective measure has been put in place. That's the protocols are strictly adhered to. But right. Obviously, some private schools too have chosen not to reopen as well. So what the federal government did was just to fix a date. The final decision, of course, would rest on the various state governments and the private school owners.
Right. Nabil, several countries are reporting a new variant of the COVID-19. What can you tell us about the new corona variant detected in Ghana, and exactly how is the government dealing with this new response?
Well, President Akufo-Addo, in his briefing last night, that's when he broke the news to us that Ghana has recorded a new strain of COVID-19. And he said it was detected at the Kotoka International Airport after tests were conducted on travelers. Now, he made mention that these travelers who tested positive for the new strain have been isolated and are receiving treatment. Now, going forward, what the government is doing is to go ahead with contact tracing and also testing to see the extent at which the new strain has spread in the country. The government says it is strengthening the already existing safety measures so that it would be able to limit the further spread of the new strain. Now, what the government says is now going to be doing differently now that we have the new strain in the system is to make sure that all travelers that come into the country after they are tested, the mandatory test is done and they test positive for COVID-19, they will all be made to undertake a mandatory isolation, and then treatment will be done at designated health facilities and isolation centers. So this wasn't done previously when travelers come and they test positive. But then the government says going forward with the new strain now in the system, all travelers who test positive for COVID-19 will be made to undergo a mandatory isolation, and then testing will be, treatments will be done at the isolation centers or the health facilities. Beatrice.
All right. Deji, Nigeria is reporting over 1,000 infections daily, and the Nigerian government has been accused of not enforcing COVID-19 protocols. Are schools really ready to reopen with these reports, with Nigeria reporting the 1,000 infections?
To be candid, Beatrice, it's difficult to say schools are actually ready to reopen, and that's the reason why some of them have decided not to reopen yet. In some cases, we've had situations where some schools have decided to go virtual. For instance, the University of Lagos is a clear case in point. The university will reopen on the 25th of this month, but it would be virtually. So, truth be told, it's difficult to say schools are ready to reopen, especially, Beatrice, especially the government-controlled public schools. It's a different scenario with private schools. At that, I would say to some extent, it appears quite a number of them are ready, but with the public schools, and these public schools are actually in the majority, and these are schools where the student population is usually very high. It's difficult to say they are all ready to reopen, but maybe what some of them would do, if they choose to go ahead to reopen, they probably would stagger classes, which is something we saw sometime last year. I think we're going to have some kind of staggering of classes because it's difficult to see how some of these schools would reopen, especially in a situation where classes are jam-packed, overcrowded, and all of that. So for now, the state governments, as I said, would have to decide, and then the school authorities too would have to decide if they have the facilities and they have the capacity to reopen. But truth be told, I don't think all of them are actually ready to reopen, especially the public schools that are overcrowded and where the student population is really, really high. It's difficult to see them having, complying with all the COVID-19 protocols now and putting everything in place to prevent any form of transmission at all.
All right, Deji Badmus joining us there from Lagos, and Nabil Ahmed Rufai in Accra. To you both, thank you. Well, meanwhile, Brazil has approved 2 coronavirus vaccines from China and the United Kingdom. Latin America's largest nation will manufacture both vaccines and is planning a nationwide rollout in coming days. Lucrecia Franco reports from Rio de Janeiro.
Slow out of the gates, Brazil finally started its coronavirus inoculation campaign after the emergency use approval of 2 vaccines on Sunday. Monica Calazans, a 50-year-old nurse, was the first in the country to receive China's CoronaVac vaccine. With more than 209,000 fatalities and the daily death toll once again topping 1,000, it was an injection of good news.
Temos vacina.
The announcement came after an hours-long public presentation of Brazil's health regulator Anvisa, which gave the green light to both China's CoronaVac and the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccines. Experts say the approval is a good start.
We need it urgently. We need both of these vaccines. And both being approved, it means that we'll have access to 2 different vaccines, 2 good vaccines.
The news comes as Manaus, the capital of the state of Amazonas, is facing an explosion of COVID-19 infections and deaths that could be linked to a newly discovered variant. For its initial vaccine supplies, Brazil is relying on 6 million CoronaVac doses that have already arrived from China and plans to send a plane equipped with the special freezers to India this week to fetch 2 million doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine.
Brazil is placing its faith in vaccines that can be manufactured locally, and the Minister of Health has guaranteed the availability of more than 350 million doses by the end of the year.
2 facilities are ramping up their capacity. The CoronaVac will be produced by São Paulo's Butantan Institute and the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine by Rio de Janeiro's Oswaldo Cruz Foundation. But led by vaccine skeptic President Jair Bolsonaro, Brazilians are divided over whether to take the shots or not.
Although I think the outbreak was poorly handled, given how serious the situation is, vaccinations need to start now.
I'm not taking the vaccine. I don't believe in it.
But Brazil is under pressure. The new variant of the virus prompted the UK and Italy to impose a ban on Brazilian travelers, another sign of how urgently the country needs to roll out its vaccination campaign. Lucrecia Franco, CGTN, Rio de Janeiro.
Well, the World Health Organization's executive board is meeting in Geneva from Monday, where independent panels are expected to report to the 34 member states forum. We are joined by CGTN's Mia Alberti, who is in Budapest for more details. Mia, the World Health Organization's Director General has just delivered his opening remarks on the organization's transformation. What is your take on his speech?
Well, it was a very significant speech, and followed by the WHO head, Dr. Tedros, who had some important remarks on his speech, saying that, for example, criticizing a lot of countries for gatekeeping information on their deals with pharmaceuticals. He said that some countries, by not revealing the price and amount of the purchase they're doing of vaccines like Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, they are making pharmaceuticals prioritize richer countries. And so he warned that poorer countries are at risk of not being able to receive the vaccine timely and with equity. And that's the biggest challenge that the world is facing right now regarding this pandemic. He said he hopes that all countries can start vaccinating, especially healthcare workers and the elderly, in the next 100 days. So according to his hopes and to his calls for the rest of the world, he wants to see all countries in the world vaccinating people by April 7th. Of course, this might sound like a lot of time, 100 days, but if we think about it, just here in Europe, we are seeing some countries which are not starting their vaccination programs as well. Dr. Tedros also announced that the WHO can recognize that it needs a council that will monitor and analyze potential future pandemics, which was something that didn't exist before. So that's something that WHO is preparing to create, a special council to monitor and prepare for future pandemics. Very relevant.
Indeed, very relevant, and a strong push for global solidarity, particularly on the matter of vaccines. What do you expect, Mia, to come out of this meeting?
Well, this is going to be a week-long meeting, and it's sort of a review of WHO's own work, not just reviewing what countries around the world have been doing during the pandemic, but also WHO's role in it. So we might be listening to an independent panel about, for example, the investigation into China, which is something that is very interesting, and I think everyone is on the edge of their seats to be waiting to hear at least some results or how the cooperation is going. So that's something we are on the lookout for, but also about, like we just talked about, vaccination, about preparation for future pandemics and restrictions and their effectiveness. So basically everything that has to do with the pandemic that has already happened and that might happen in the future, that's something we can expect from the WHO itself, as well as some internal review and some changes within the WHO, like the creation of this special council, like I just mentioned.
All right, Mia Alberti joining us there from Budapest. Thank you. You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. SADC to hold a heads of state summit in January to discuss the situation in northern Mozambique. And Egypt's parliament now has 162 women members of parliament, the highest number in the country's history.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Syria,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The Southern African Development Community plans to hold a Heads of State Summit in January to discuss the situation in northern Mozambique. An insurgency led by a group linked to the Islamic State in the Cabo Delgado province that borders southern Tanzania has seen thousands of civilians killed and many more displaced. CGTN's Isaac Lucando has more details.
Since October 2017, the province of Cabo Delgado in northern Mozambique has been experiencing an insurgency from Islamist group Al-Shabaab. The country's president, Filipe Nyusi, recently traveled to Tanzania to hold talks with his counterpart, Dr. John Magufuli, on the situation.
We are not connected just because of the border we share, but it's through people. Many Tanzanians are in Mozambique, and some of Mozambique's people are here. We talked about how our people can live well as issues of security.
The Southern African Development Community SADC, which brings together 16 member countries, has been criticized for not doing enough to resolve the situation in northern Mozambique. SADC is seeking a comprehensive regional response to the crisis.
SADC has an organ called the Troika, whose function is to look at matters of politics, defence and security. This can help to create strategies and to use member states, perhaps through contributing armed forces, in order to help resolve this matter, just like SADC was able to help the DRC at one point.
In 2015, SADC, in line with the United Nations Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy, developed a regional counter-terrorism plan. It provides for assistance in preventing youth radicalization, enhancing border security, offering humanitarian aid, and tackling the root causes of terrorism.
According to the United Nations, the crisis in northern Mozambique has already caused more than 2,000 deaths, over half of them civilians, and some 500,000 displaced persons. This in a region that is strategic for the exploitation of huge gas reserves.
In November last year, police chiefs from Mozambique and Tanzania agreed to start joint operations to combat the insurgency. Tanzania's Inspector General of Police says they are now seeing progress on that front.
There are people we've arrested who have confessed to being involved in the insurgency, so we are moving on well. Let me request that our citizens in those areas continue with their lives, taking care of their families and to not be afraid.
An end to the insurgency in Cabo Delgado will help Mozambique and its neighbors to enjoy peace and to fully benefit from the region's natural resources. Isaac Lucando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Authorities in the Democratic Republic of Congo have marked the 20th anniversary of the assassination of former President Laurent Kabila with calls for unity and reconciliation. Several Congolese citizens hailed their former leader for uniting their country that was sharply divided after war broke out in 1996. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa has the details.
A solemn ceremony in the DRC capital, Kinshasa. Hundreds of Congolese turned up at the Palais de la Nation to pay homage to their country's third president, Laurent Kabila. The former president was shot dead by his bodyguard in 2001, but his memory lives on.
Tuko tunakumbuka sana Mzee Laurent Kabila.
We will always remember the words of Mzee Laurent Kabila. I will never betray the Congo. He taught us to be patriotic. Many of us who knew him were ready to die for our country because of his great leadership. He really united us at a time our country was divided.
Tuwe tayari kukufa juu ya Kongo.
We are here to mourn our former president. We are nationalists who are following in his footsteps. He did not die in vain because we have become his disciples.
Many senior government officials showed up to pay their respects. This year's commemoration was held a week after President Felix Tshisekedi pardoned 22 men who were sentenced to death for killing Laurent Kabila. The former president was fondly known as Mzee, which means elder in Kiswahili. He died at the age of 61. He was succeeded by his son, Joseph Kabila, in 2001.
Laurent Kabila is regarded as a hero by many in the DRC for leading the rebellion that ousted long-serving President Mobutu Sese Seko in 1997. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Some news coming in from eastern China now. Officials have held a press conference on the latest emergency measures and rescue progress in the gold mine blast in East China's Shandong province. Rescue efforts are ongoing for 22 mine workers after the explosion. The rescue team says it has confirmed the location of 12 trapped workers after drilling the first hole from the surface to the tunnel, and they have had a first call with those trapped underground. The status of 10 others remains unclear. Well, the recently elected Egyptian House of Representatives held its first session this week. Women rights activists have hailed its composition as the House now has 162 women as members. This is the biggest number of seats held by women in Egyptian history and more than 25% quota set by the Egyptian constitution. Here's Adil Makroui with a story.
Egypt's National Council for Women says 2021 is the golden year for women in the Egyptian parliament. 162 women have taken their oaths of service this week, and their numbers in the House now make up almost 26% of the parliamentary seats. The legislative chamber has never had these many females since its establishment in 1866.
The President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi have insisted and have focused on increasing people's awareness on increasing women's participation in the economy and in the government. Even during 2017, the President started his campaigns. The 2030 vision that's going to be in 2030, which is assuming that the women participation is going to be up to 50%. And I think, in my opinion, that it's going to be even in less period than 2030.
Ghada Ali has been recently elected for the first time as a member of parliament. She teaches business at Cairo University and has spent 7 years in public services fighting violence against women and promoting youth entrepreneurship.
I have had my share of public service, but I've never imagined that one day I would become an empowered youth by getting elected to parliament. The legislative hall has become a sacred place to me, which I had never visited before my first session. I had mixed feelings of fear and pride while entering the hall for the first time. I hope that I can make a change and leave a mark for women there.
The 2019 constitutional amendment, which has seen President el-Sisi's years in office extended, was a game-changer for Egyptian women. It has increased the women's quota in the parliament to 25%. Additionally, through it, the president gets to appoint 28 members. Half of them this year were women. While it is clear there is political will to empower Egyptian women, that might not necessarily be achieved on a popular level. The quota for Egyptian women in the parliament was achieved through the list voting seats. But in the highly competitive individual seats race, only 6 women managed to defeat their male rivals in their constituencies. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
China's Statistics Bureau says the country's economy showed steady recovery in 2020, exceeding expectations amid a roller coaster of a year. CGTN's Gao Ang takes a look at the numbers.
Unhindered growth amid a pandemic. According to preliminary estimates, China's GDP grew 2.3% in 2020. It has also exceeded 100 trillion yuan, or $15.4 trillion for the first time. There was a contraction of more than 6% in the first quarter last year, the lowest point in history. But this was followed by an expansion of over 3% in the second quarter and over 4% in the third quarter, hitting 6.5% in the final quarter of 2020.
The pandemic prevention and control work has achieved major results, and benchmarks for economic and social development were accomplished, exceeding expectations.
Ying says China's grain output reached a high point, while pork production sustained a fast recovery for 2020. There was also growth in industrial production, high-tech manufacturing, and foreign trade. Ying pointed to several factors leading to economic recovery.
With a population of 1.4 billion people and more than 400 million middle-income earners, China's domestic market boasts the largest growth potential in the world. The advantages of a super large-scale market are obvious. In the new year, no matter how the international situation changes, the domestic market is our foothold to more development.
The International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, predicted in October that global GDP would contract by 4.4% for 2020. It also projected that China could be the only major economy to grow last year. As economic expansion is important, Ning says China is keeping an eye on how it turns out.
China has been paying more attention to quality of growth. Officials say that boosting domestic consumption and promoting innovation are two key methods to support continued development amid uncertainties brought on by fast-changing external circumstances. Gang, CGTN, Beijing.
And we still have more news coming up for you on the program. Here's what's ahead. South Africa's wine industry risks $100 million losses due to lack of storage.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
South Africa's embattled wine industry could lose an estimated $100 million worth of stock as it runs out of space to store excess wine. The new harvest is starting amid the third alcohol sales ban, threatening the financial viability of one of the biggest employers in the Western Cape. Angelo Coppola picks up the story.
SA Breweries is challenging the constitutionality of the third ban. The company says the first two bans saw 165,000 people lose their jobs, with another 100,000 people moving into poverty as a result of the alcohol bans.
We're looking at tens of millions of litres, but that's still a lot of wine. So that is an issue because obviously cellars are full and people need to harvest and we need to bring in the new harvest. So we're looking at probably about 65% of the previous harvest not being sold yet, which is a huge issue for the industry because cellars have to be cleared so that we can actually go into production and we've got space. The impact's been really significant. I mean, if they say that the ban will only be lifted on the 15th of February, we will have not been able to trade in South Africa for 5.5 months of our financial year. And 50% of our business is local business.
The wine industry employs some 500,000 people with an annual turnover of around $500 million. The three alcohol bans have been devastating.
Wine tourism is a very important part of our business. Normally, Creation has 64,000 visitors a year visiting us. Well, obviously, we are at half that amount this year so far. And the impact is significant. We have 50 people that work in wine tourism in our tasting room. And, you know, we had to retrench 20 people. We had no choice to do that. A few months ago, we managed to bring most of them back on board when we were allowed to open up again. And we're in a precarious position yet again.
The wine industry was caught completely off guard when South African President Cyril Ramaphosa announced another lockdown late in December.
We had a full book of reservations until the 15th of January. And so we had to obviously cancel all of those reservations, and we've now had to cancel reservations going forward until the ban is lifted.
The wine industry in South Africa is in a state of flux at the moment, and decisions have to be made and made quickly, otherwise it's going to suffer irreparable damage. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Tunisians are eager to switch to 5G technology and expect it to be rolled out in the next 2 years. A survey conducted by the government indicates users in various fields such as agriculture, industry, medical and the services sector say 5G technology will help optimize costs and increase production in the North African state. From Tunis, here is CGTN's Adnan Chauchi with the details.
Karim Mahrez is a senior consultant and a successful ICT entrepreneur in Tunisia and Africa. He says that 5G's industrial applications will bring revolutionary change and will form the backbone of future economic advancement and public services.
5G is a real opportunity because it will create some 22 million new jobs by 2030. It will create $13 trillion of growth and new projects. We must understand that 5G is not like the evolution of the mobile phone from 3G to 5G. 5G is some 1 million IoT per square kilometer. 5G is the 4.0 industry, drones, digital art, connected schools with robots. 5G is also telesurgery.
Tunisia's telecoms minister had earlier said licenses suitable for the next generation of mobile broadband services could be awarded this year. The Netcom Tunisia chief executive says 5G will offer an opportunity for developing countries to boost their economies and create new jobs in new sectors. He asserts that China's Huawei is the world leader in this technology.
Huawei does not only offer this possibility of 5G infrastructure with the Internet of Things and industry-related services, it's more than that. Huawei also provides the layers above like artificial intelligence as well as data and privacy protection. I am sure that many decision makers in Africa and developing countries are smart enough to deploy and use Chinese networks and artificial intelligence than any other competitors.
Huawei Northern Africa's vice president in charge of public relations for the Mediterranean region, Adnan Ben Halima, explains that the Chinese company is willing to install 5G technology that will help Tunisia and the world.
5G technology now is a new trend of technologies. I think it will play a very important role for the future to develop new services and provide new connectivity. We are really eager to deploy this technology in Tunisia and also in other countries in this region. Huawei is very advanced thanks to the research and development efforts that have been done recently, and thanks to the product quality and the solution that we are providing to our customers.
In December 2020, Tunisia Telecom carried out the first test call, which showed a speed of connections to the 5G mobile network exceeding 2.2 gigabytes per second. This 5G mobile test call was made with a smartphone and a modem, using the telecom company's live network. According to the ICT Ministry, Tunisia's telecoms regulators launched a feasibility study of 5G. The licenses suitable for the next generation of mobile broadband services could be awarded in 2021. Experts assert that 5G networks will change several industries. Adnan Chauchi, CGTN, Tunis.
Egypt has finally opened its airspace to Qatar just days after a quartet of Gulf countries agreed to mend ties with Doha. The decision paves the way for direct flights to resume after a blockade of more than 3.5 years. Now, CGTN's Adel Mahroui reports the move boosts efforts to revive economic ties between the two Arab nations.
Egypt's national carrier, Egypt Air, has announced it will resume direct flights with the Qatari capital, Doha. The first flight is scheduled on January 18. But due to the current COVID-19 travel restrictions, the carrier will begin with one flight daily from Cairo.
Any added flight will increase the profit of the company if it is have a capacity of passengers. But we don't know actually how much will be the capacity, how many passengers will be filling the aircrafts or not. So it's not clear yet how far it will affect Egypt financial situation. Of course, yes. It's good for the company, and also Qatar is an Arab country, and this is good to return back to flying to Qatar.
Egypt Air is planning to gradually increase flights to Doha until it goes back to the 3 flights a day norm. 4 additional weekly flights from Alexandria's Borg Al Arab airport could be introduced once the company finds appetite from travelers. Egypt and Qatar are moving fast in normalizing ties. Hours after they signed Al-Ola Reconciliation Accord on January 5th, the Qatari finance minister visited Cairo with a business delegation to revive projects that have been suspended for years.
Qatar's economy has been suffering because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the drop in oil prices, and the flights ban. Meanwhile, most of the Qatari investment during the crisis went to Iran instead of Egypt and the Gulf nations. The impact of severing ties, however, has been more evident on companies rather than the economies of both countries.
In 2019, Egyptian exports to Qatar were roughly $170,000, but they dropped to nearly zero in 2020. The banking sector in Egypt will see some positive developments, with Qatar National Bank planning to expand investments in the North African state after 3.5 years of stagnation. Real estate will probably benefit the most. Top developers from both nations had projects worth $5 billion, all of which froze with the diplomatic crisis. Resuming flights is the first step in reviving economic ties between Egypt and Qatar, as businessmen will be free to move. But more importantly, it's a huge relief for more than 300,000 Egyptians who work in Qatar. They've been suffering from long layovers instead of a 3-hour direct flight. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
And in your sports news, the postponement of the Tokyo Olympic Games